What is going on, everybody? I hope you are all doing well today. Today I am joined by a very special guest. She has inspired me to do YouTube creation. I have watched her for years. I am joined by the one and only Geek Apprentice. Geek, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Absolutely. It's so awesome to have you on to talk about Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. What an amazing game. And we get to talk about basically where we think this entire franchise might be going post Tears of the Kingdom. So I'm just really just excited to just jump into the discussion today. But before we do that, Geek, just kind of tell everybody what your channel's about, what you do, kind of a parental rating, in terms of what you do.
Mm-hmm. So, again, I'm the Geek Apprentice, but you can just refer to me as Geek or TGA. TGA sometimes gets confusing with people because people know TGA as the Game Awards, so most people just stick with Geek. I've been making videos for a few years now. I tend to keep the focus on Zelda and Animal Crossing as of late, mostly Zelda, naturally, because of Tears of the Kingdom, and then 1 month out of the year I focus on the Hunger Games. I had other franchises I was very much into, but just for channel content and my brain, decided to keep it mainly to those three. I basically make videos that I myself would like to watch, if that makes sense. For a while I steered clear of like top 10s and top 5s, even though I realized, oh, I actually really like watching those videos in the background. So my idea is like I just make videos that I know I would enjoy watching, which is typically top 5s, top 10s, discussion videos, sometimes theory videos, although there's always the massive disclaimer that I know I'm probably missing something because I haven't played most of the 2D games. I do live streams, and as far as a parental guidance rating, strictly PG. Funny enough, right after I had asked all of you guys, the other creators, for my discussion to give a parental guide rating, I accidentally said, not terrible, but I accidentally said HE double hockey sticks. It's not that bad of a word, hell, on my live stream, and I was like, right after I said I'm a strictly PG channel. Could be way worse, but the idea behind that is not that it's for kids. It's not. It's meant to be for like young adults, maybe older adults who just really love Zelda games. But the idea of why it's PG is one, because I'm just not someone who swears. I'm not someone who likes to have mature content or inappropriate jokes. That's just not something I'm a fan of. And it's easy for me to do that because I'm a dance teacher at a Christian dance studio, so I have to pigeonhole myself to that anyway, which is pretty easy to do. And also because I definitely have noticed an influx of viewership, people who have children. And they mention how even though their children have no idea what my videos are about, they can watch my live streams, they can watch my videos, and their children can hear it off in the background, and they don't have to worry whether their kid is in the room and is this creator going to drop the F-bomb or something. They know I'm not going to do that, so that's why I'm PG.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm the exact same way. I have a family and 2 younger siblings, and they're big Nintendo fans as well, and they're subscribed to me, and so I know that they watch my content, and so I'm not gonna do that. But anyway, yeah, that's awesome, Geek. I'm just excited to have you on today, and let's just get right into it. I want to begin before we start talking about the future of Zelda. Let's talk about Tears of the Kingdom for just a brief minute. You and I both have played it. By the way, I should preface this first. Spoiler warning, if you haven't beaten the game, probably go beat it before you watch this discussion, because we're probably going to be referring back to some of the major moments multiple times throughout this discussion. But yeah, so we both played it, we both beat it, and before we start talking about the future of Zelda, let's talk about just how amazing this game was. What was sort of your favorite moments while playing through this game, and definitely was it worth the wait for you?
I think 2 of the things that were my favorite moments was, one, the story. Well, yes, I would have preferred to participate in the story a little bit more, and it was a little too similar to Breath of the Wild, even though I like Breath of the Wild. I just really enjoyed the story and the fact that there was such a focus on Zelda, and I don't mean that in the sense of like, yay, a focus on the female. I'm not that type of person. I'm like, just give me a good story. I don't care who it's focusing on. And then for me personally, the gameplay was a huge deal because I've always been very, for want of better phrasing, shy when it comes to bosses and just the gameplay in general. I mean, sure, I grew up playing Zelda, but really it was watching my older brothers play, and I would ride around on Epona in Ocarina of Time, play the Ocarina, and then, I arrive in Gerudo Desert step off that platform and there's all these enemies coming at me, and I'm like, just kidding, we're gonna go back to riding around on Epona. So I feel like I had a massive jump in. Yeah, I'll just dive into trying to fight this boss. What's the big deal? I'll just go for it. And I'm noticing that now as I'm trying to play through Minish Cap, that I'm not really looking at guides anymore, which is really, really nice. Worth the wait? Yes, 100% worth the wait. And some may not know this, but I know they were originally projected to finish in 2022. They did finish in 2022. And when I learned that they did actually finish it, but had planned in advance to extend that time period so they could clean it and fix the bugs that might be in there, I thought, man, so many companies really, really, really need to learn from this. Pokemon, looking at you. So, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned Minish Cap. That's actually my favorite top-down Zelda game. Yeah, and I'm right there with you. It was definitely worth the wait. The story this time around was so far surpassed Breath of the Wild for me. I enjoyed the story for Breath of the Wild, very much so. But just the reintroduction of Ganondorf and that whole opening segment when you go down there and he wakes up and you hear him speak for the first time. Ganondorf's one of my favorite video game villains of all time, and the fact that we actually were going to get to hear him voiced, which I know when they first started with the trailers and we heard his voice in the trailers for the first time, a lot of people were just kind of like, this is how Ganondorf sounds? What is this? And it wasn't all put together yet, and whenever we hear him fully in game, when it's all put together, it sold it for me. Every scene he was in gave me chills. Yeah, absolutely. I think the game was definitely worth the wait. And I'm interesting you were talking about how other companies should probably learn from what the Zelda team has done. Like you said, they finished in 2022 and they took a whole other year just to polish it and refine it. And I think really and truly that's what other game companies should do. They should not rush their games out. They just slap an open world and hope for the best, and then it comes accompanied with all these bugs and things that don't need to be there, and ends up, the game starts to crash and burn from day one, because the first impression is always the most important, right? And Tears of the Kingdom had a great first impression from the very beginning all the way to the end. So the next thing I wanted to kind of talk about is, as we start looking into the future of Zelda, a lot of people, of course, fell in love with the storytelling. We just kind of talked about that. And, they've chosen a really interesting way to tackle it with the open world format, with the memories and everything. But we're just kind of starting out with the open world in general. Do you think that format is kind of here to stay for the future of specifically the 3D Zelda? Do you think the next 3D Zelda game is going to be open world again, or do you think they might bring back some traditional Zelda elements, like traditional dungeons or anything like that? Would you like to see some traditional elements return?
I do think it's going to be a mix of both. I can't see them going back to Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess, and just the extreme linearity. And funny enough, I'm someone who prefers linearity, but after playing both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, trying to go back and playing a Zelda game I have not played before, such as Minish Cap, I'm like, man, I kind of wish I could just explore, but there's all these places I can't get to, and I'm like, I see why open world has so many benefits. So I think from an overworld perspective, they are going to keep the open air gameplay, which I think I might just also prefer that. But I also know that Nintendo does listen, and they did kind of try to give us more dungeons, but I don't see them as dungeons. I mean, they are, and technically the Divine Beasts are too. They're just not the Zelda standard, in my opinion. But open world was definitely new to them. So my hope is that the direction they're going to go is, yes, we're going to keep the overworld open, but we're going to try and make specific dungeons again, where there is the one linear aspect is the dungeon itself, that no, you can't just access every room right away, which you kind of saw that in the Lightning Temple. Right. I feel like it was one of the closest to a regular dungeon. It was still the same as the rest and the Divine Beast in the sense that there was 5 things you needed to activate with Riju's lightning ability, but there was places you could not get to. And I thought, wow, that's the closest we're getting to an actual traditional dungeon feel. So I don't know if that's necessarily what I actually think Nintendo's gonna do next. That's more so, I guess, what I hope they'll do next is keep the openness of the world, but make dungeons themselves, even if you can go in any order, make it so there's a linear aspect to it. And they could even pull from A Link Between Worlds and make it so you can get items relatively whenever you want, but if you have the wrong item for the wrong dungeon, then you're gonna have to go somewhere else. So they might do that, but I wouldn't be opposed to getting an item based on the dungeon you go to, going back to that. So that's what I hope they'll do.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And they've proven that they could bring, like, for one thing that I know would make it feel very traditional Zelda dungeon again is they brought back one simple addition, small keys, being able to find small keys. And in some of the shrines, that's what you're doing. So they've proven that they can do that. And my first knee-jerk reaction when I first saw that small keys were back, I was like, oh, maybe they'll be in dungeons. And then they weren't. So kind of disappointed. But it's all, but I'm right there with you. Like, the Lightning Temple felt like the most traditional of all of them, and it's also my favorite because it felt like a perfect merge between this openness, kind of go wherever you want, and the more traditional style, which I kind of expected they would do. I felt like Tears of the Kingdom was going to be more of a merge between this openness and linear style of gameplay. And it's also another reason why I thought that is because Breath of the Wild was like many people's first introduction into the Zelda franchise. Like, up until Breath of the Wild, the Zelda series, I believe, like, the most successful game was Twilight Princess. I think it was the most popular, and even then, I think it only sold like 7 million copies, something around that point. And then Breath of the Wild comes along and shatters that record and sells almost double that, and it's, I think, like, over triple that now. And so, I think so that type of gameplay, that open world gameplay, and even the Divine Beasts, that was their first dungeon experience. That was their first, that was their Zelda experience. So that's kind of all they would know. So I kind of see why they made the decisions they did for Tears of the Kingdom. But I'm a lot like you. I hope that going forward, because now they've had basically 10 years to work in this new Zelda formula, and I can tell they're still refining it. And so I'm really hoping that maybe for the next Zelda game, whatever it ends up being, I hope that if it is open world, that they can find a way to bring some of those traditional elements back in a much more grand way. Now, the next thing I wanted to kind of talk about, because I know the story was amazing in Tears of the Kingdom, but one of the reasons why the story was so powerful in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is because of the amazing voice acting. Patricia Summerset as Zelda, got to meet her, she was amazing. And Matthew Mercer as Ganondorf killed it. The one thing I've seen a lot of debate, and I want to hear where you stand on this. I'm still not sure yet. I'm kind of in between on it, but I want to know where you think. Do you think in the future of the Zelda series, do you think that they should give Link a voice? What do you think?
No, I really do not want him to. And I've gone back and forth. I thought, is this just because, like, am I a Zelda purist in that sense? Where it's like, no, Link has never talked. But it's like, Link does. Did I say Zelda? Link never talks. Link does talk. He talks all the time. You see it in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom clearly when you pick a response and he does all those hand motions. If you've already done something by the time you get to an NPC, like I found the 5th sage before talking to everyone, talking to Purah. And she was like, what do you mean you already found it? Why didn't you mention that before? And because Link makes those hand motions. So he does technically talk, but I think they handled it very well in Breath of the Wild, where Zelda points out, I think it's in her journal, that she says, he's always so quiet and reserved, and he talks about, well, given my position as a soldier and as a knight, and as your protector, like, I can't. I have to be careful, and I have to keep some points of views and opinions to myself, and I think they can roll with that he's silent, in the sense that he keeps a lot to himself. He and, forgetting his name, Daruk, probably had massive camaraderie, and I'm sure they had lots of laughs, things like that. But I think you can keep the silent protagonist aspect, and still have great cutscenes. Like, my thing is I would like to participate in the story a bit more. I do think that's possible, and you can still keep Link in the background. You can still have the conversation be between them, and you're the observer as Link, is usually what's happening. And you can still chime in when they ask, what's your response to this? And then they just respond to the bubble that you picked. You don't have to actually hear him talk. And technically he does have a voice actor because he makes all those sounds. My mom makes fun of those sounds all the time whenever she's climbing in Tears of the Kingdom. She's like, he makes the weirdest sounds. I'm like, well, he's got to make at least some sound. If anything, I would just like, animation-wise, to show a little bit more on the face. Me personally, Wind Waker was probably one of the most expressive, funny Links I've ever seen. Now the Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword didn't have it, they did too. But there's memes from their expression, I think. But, yeah, that's the very long version of the short answer, which is no, I don't want excessive voice acting from Link.
Yeah, because, there's also, we'll kind of talk about it a little bit more later, but, there's been rumors and talks of a Zelda movie as well. And, and so I feel like, a voice for Link is probably inevitable if they go that route. But one of the things, you talked about Link being more expressive. I kind of agree. Link needs to be just a little more expressive. Like, for example, that memory that broke all of us, where Zelda becomes a dragon, and we see that very emotional pull, and then it cuts back to Link, and he still has there's a little bit of expression there, but it's still kind of his same, like, regular grin face that he always makes. And I was just like, you witnessed your lifelong princess who you've protected and guarded your whole life turn into a dragon. You gonna say anything? Yeah, I totally agree, though. I think Link probably needs to be a little more expressive in future Zelda games. To piggyback off of that question, so there are talks and rumors of a Zelda movie, and because of Nintendo's crazy success with the Mario movie, first off, have you seen the Mario movie?
I really wanted to, but the Mario movie came out right at peak recital time for my dance studio, so I was spending most of my days choreographing and sometimes being at the studio extra long hours. I originally said I wasn't going to see it, period, but then watching the trailers, I was like, it actually seems somewhat interesting, and if you're going to make a movie out of any Nintendo franchise, Mario's the one to do. And from what I heard, they did a great job, so I could have watched it when I flew to visit my mom because it was available on the flight, but I was like, I'm kind of sleepy, so I didn't. So I have not watched it, but I want to eventually.
Yeah, it's a great movie. If you're a Nintendo fan, it is a love letter to Mario fans, and it was in Charles Martinet. I know you probably heard that he's stepping down as the voice of Mario, but he cameos as one of the characters in the movie, and he did such a phenomenal job. But like in terms of like Easter eggs for diehard Nintendo fans, it is a love letter to them, and you can definitely tell Shigeru Miyamoto's hand was on it from start to finish. And I know there was a lot of controversy around Chris Pratt as Mario. Didn't really bother me. So if you're worried about that, I don't think you really have much to worry about. I mean, it's not, his voice isn't distracting, if that makes any sense. It's not like, something that's gonna like throw you off guard every time you hear Mario speak. But anyway, kind of transitioning that back to Zelda, is a Zelda movie something you would like to see?
Is it something I would like to see? No. Is it something I think could happen? Yes. Funny thing, my very first video was actually why I believe a Zelda movie can't work. It's very old and very not well edited, or just, yeah, it was not not a great video. But I actually rewatched it I think last year for like my channel anniversary or something. I was like, let's go back and watch the first video. I was like, even though the actual like production value was terrible of that video, I was like, I still stand by what I said, which is there's just too many elements. I know Zelda can be lighthearted, and it can be funny. There's so many weird characters in Zelda, but I don't think it's lighthearted enough to make a campy movie about. I mean, we all know the Zelda TV series, but I don't think anyone counts that. Like, I would not hold that. That's not why I wouldn't want a movie, because I'm like, okay, that was just clearly poorly done. Like, that's a whole different thing. I don't pigeonhole them to that. Because some people would argue that's why the Mario movie couldn't have worked, because of the old Mario movie, and I'm like, no, those were two very, very different things. Just me personally, I just think the way Zelda is, especially because of who Link is too, I don't know, there's lore, but there's also not lore, whereas like Mario is kind of more free-for-all in my opinion. I don't play a ton of Mario. I play like Mario Party and Mario Kart, though I did play like Mario Sunshine growing up. A little bit of Mario 64, a little bit of Mario Galaxy, not a ton. I don't know, it's sometimes I can't even put words to it, where I'm like, just something about Zelda I feel like should not be made into a film. And the other part of that is I would prefer live action if they did it, and that would require a high production value in order to make elements of Zelda work, and a lot of people want a cartoon, and I just personally disagree. I see what people are thinking. A lot of people think Studio Ghibli would be the route to go if they made a Zelda film. I guess if you were to do it, like, the story would need to be completely unique. Like you said, the Mario film was a love letter to Mario fans. So they could just put all the crazy elements of Mario Kart, Mario Party in there and still make it work, which of course I haven't seen it, but that's kind of the general consensus I've heard. I don't think you can do that with Zelda. But I would be happy to be proven wrong. I try to be careful. I mentioned in that old video that, you know, like some of the things that I was basing my thoughts on as a theater major. But I was also in my senior year of college, like just about to graduate when I recorded that, so it's very possible I was just thinking too highly of what little I knew. Especially because I didn't do film work. I did some. I've been in a couple of like short student films, but not like, I don't know. It's just different than stage plays. But yeah, long answer, too long. No, I would not like one, but I could see them doing it. I just don't think it would be as successful or as easily done as a Mario movie would be.
Oh yeah. I really would love a Zelda movie. I think it would be so cool to go into a theater and on the big screen hear that that majestical Zelda theme in the theater and that Zelda logo appear, and just and even if it were like an animated film, I think they could still maintain some of that serious tone. Like Ocarina of Time is a great example. You know, that game has some very serious tone, and probably the most serious of all the 3D Zelda games. There's some dark stuff in that game. That one and Majora's Mask. But, you know, I feel like if they were to go an animated route, you know, I feel like, you know, doing something on the, you know, kins of Ocarina of Time would be pretty cool. But I'm a lot like you, you know, live action would be amazing. And I think if they were to ever do something like that, like something on the scale of Twilight Princess would be a great blueprint for them to start on, because it's not, even though that one is still animated, it looks very much more realistic than say, you know, Ocarina of Time or Wind Waker, you know. Now, you know, this is probably not a route I'm sure you would want them to go, but if they were to ever, like, if they wanted to do like something goofy, Wind Waker. You know, Wind Waker is a very, very shiny, colorful, it's very lighthearted and not very dark. There are some, you know, tense moments in it, but, you know, mostly a lighthearted game. But yeah, so I think a Zelda movie is 100% probably going to come. The question is how are they going to do it? And I hope that they prove you wrong. I hope it's amazing, and I think it will be, because the Mario movie, they took, you know, ample time, I know, to make that, you know, to animate that and to put that together. And even though it's like only a 90-minute film, an hour and a half, it's 90 minutes of Nintendo goodness from start to finish. And it's, you know, and I feel like, Nintendo strives for that, not just in their games, but now even in film as well. We saw with the Mario movie. I feel like that's something that they would definitely strive for that in Zelda, since it's another one of their most popular franchises. Next to Mario. If Mario wasn't their mascot, I would argue Link would be. I really do. So kind of going back to the story part, kind of going further deeper into the story side of Zelda, the memory system was introduced in Breath of the Wild, improved upon, in my opinion, in Tears of the Kingdom, because Impa does tell you, hey, I recommend you go here and then go here. There is a suggested route if you want to go find the memories in order in Tears of the Kingdom, which is probably the best thing to do if you want to really enjoy the story in Tears of the Kingdom. I know there are people I've talked to, and even some in our discussion that I got to have on your channel, who didn't find the memories in order, and as a result it kind of hurt their experience with the story. I was one of those lucky few who everything kind of magically fell into place, and I was able to I watched it, and I was able to see it in order, and it blew my mind. And so that's why I really enjoyed the story for Tears of the Kingdom. But do you think the memory system is something that's probably going to stay, or do you think they should get rid of it?
I really think they need to get rid of the memory system. I understand why it happened the way it did for both games. Breath of the Wild especially, because they hadn't done that big of an open world, that I'm sure it was a little bit daunting to imagine, well, how do we make a linear story unless it's set in a past time and it can all just be pre-recorded? Something for Link to discover later, even though he was a part of it, but like kind of not really. And the focus is on like what he saw in those memories. Some of it is on what Zelda saw. And same with this game, just the way the story went. Personally, I felt like the reason they went this direction was not even as much of a how do we make a linear story in an open world, as much as that's just the way it happened with the story, is what makes sense. And that's why I think it didn't feel as choppy, I guess, as Breath of the Wild. And again, I'm a big advocate of Breath of the Wild story. I also don't like how it comes. It is kind of annoying, like, oh, like, Link did participate in this, but I did not, because I was not there as the player playing Link. But I didn't mind that, because I was like, okay, but the story itself is really good. And I appreciate that in Tears of the Kingdom. There is a way to find them in order. As we had said on the discussion, maybe it would have been better if it had been that maybe the geoglyphs don't appear until you find the memory before, or the dragon tear prior to that. That may have been easier. Because I'm very much not ashamed to ask for help when I'm live streaming. So I flat out was like, is there an order to them? And everyone was like, yes, there is. Just follow Impa. And I was like, great, that's what I'm doing. And when I followed Impa, I was able to find the order relatively easily. So I was very grateful for that. But I do think they need to step away from the memories. I think a lot of us are wanting more active participation. And kind of like what I mentioned with, is the open world here to stay? If they can have dungeons in a linear order, or not a linear order, maybe. If they can make dungeons linear, I think they can make the story a little bit clearer and have you have active participation in it. Because if the story's set in the present, they can make it so that, okay, I did the fire dungeon before I did the water dungeon, so that affects how my water dungeon cutscene is affected, which they should have done with Tears of the Kingdom too. I really did not need to hear the backstory of what happened with the sage every single time. I was like, I've already heard this. Because I did Wind Temple, then I did Water Temple. And I remember thinking like, oh, I wonder if it'll be slightly different. Like, the words were slightly different.
Demon
but it was
King,
the same
Secret
story.
Stone.
It's like, yes, I know. And I understand from the perspective of, well, Sidon didn't know what all that was. And I can hear that, but it was like, well, you couldn't have made it. It would have been nice if they only gave you parts of it. Like in the Wind Temple, you learn this part. Or
right.
Whichever dungeon you do first, you hear the first part. And then they just move on. I don't know. I'm not a game maker. But, yeah, I think the memories need to not be a part of it. I understand why they happened for these games. But I really hope Nintendo finds a way, much like with Dungeons, to find a more linear way of doing it in a way that we can participate more heavily.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. Yeah, with the whole backstory with the imprisoning war, because it all kind of builds whenever you finally get to Minoru, because you actually get to see it, and you get to see when King Rauru, seals Ganondorf away. Such a powerful cutscene, by the way. Remember his name, and that Zelda theme swells. It's so cool. But yeah, it would have been so much more powerful, like you said, if they kind of cut that scene up a little bit and you only got to see maybe a small piece of it, or maybe because you only get to see, or maybe even their charge to Ganondorf, because you only get to see when they're in the imprisoning chamber. You never got to see like their journey to the imprisoning chamber. That would have been really cool to see, because whenever you go down there as the player, you feel like you're going through just 7 levels of torture whenever you're going down there. I'd like to see how they made it through those 7 levels of torture just to get down there. That would have been really cool to see, but that was the imprisoning war, which we hear repeated over and over again. But yeah, I'm a lot like you. I think the memory system probably needs to go. It was a great starting point for open world Zelda. It was a great, place to begin. But I think, I'm a lot like you. I think the reason why I gravitate towards story, like the other greater stories like Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, is because, you as the player are experiencing that whenever a big cutscene takes place, you are actively there. Link is actively there. Have you, I don't think, you said you haven't quite finished Twilight Princess, is that right?
Yeah, I have this bad habit of starting Twilight Princess, finishing the first dungeon and going, no thanks. And I know that's terrible, but for some reason it's not because it's a bad game. I just can't do it. But I do know Twilight Princess's whole story, because trying to keep a long story short, when I started to get back into Zelda, like sophomore year of college, because I grew up with people who didn't really play video games as friends. Not a bad thing, but so I kind of fell out of video games. Found friends in college who did, and they like Zelda, so I got back into it. I watched someone's Let's Play that they had recorded of Twilight Princess, because I knew that was the last game I was aware of that was Zelda after Wind Waker. I had no idea about all the many other Zelda games, but I watched their Let's Play and I was like, this game is great. But then when I actually went to play it, I was like, I like watching it.
Yeah, it's a long game. Twilight Princess is probably the longest of the 3D Zelda games, because there's so much, there's a lot to... Yeah, not only is there a lot of dungeons, but there's a lot you have to do in between the dungeons, particularly the city in the sky. That's probably the longest trek of stuff you have to do to get to a dungeon. I've never seen such a long sequence of things you had to do. I had to whip out a guide my first time playing the game because I had no idea what to do just to get there. But yeah, but going back to like how you're able to actively participate in the story. But I'm sure you've seen the cutscene when like Colin gets captured by King Boblin and Link comes riding in on Epona. That's a really cool moment, but it's even more cool because it's actively happening. It hasn't already happened. It's not like a memory where we see Sonya getting stabbed in the back, which was I didn't think Nintendo would ever go there, but they actually did. Very that's very dark. Pretty epic moment to see Ganondorf become the Demon King and all of that. Really cool, dark moment, but also really epic as well. But it would have been more epic if it had happened in real time and Link was there, or maybe even I've always thought about what if it would have been really cool, because they were talking about, and Aonuma was talking about an unfamiliar Hyrule. Wouldn't it have been cool if when Zelda fell down and she vanished in that golden light, if Link vanished with her? Like if they both wound up in this Hyrule from the distant past, and that's the new Hyrule you have to explore. That would have been, I think that would have been amazing. But yeah, I'm a lot like you. I think the memory system probably needs to go, and they need to probably have a way, some way, shape, or form, bring back some linearity with it, and have Link more actively participate in the story. That's why I think the beginning of the game is so powerful and the end of the game is so powerful, because because there's no memories involved in that. It's all happening in real time. Zelda really does come in and save you when you're fighting the demon dragon, and it's really cool. So but moving on, Tears of the Kingdom, massive success. Do you see potential for a possible Breath of the Wild 3? And I think I'm kind of leaning on 50-50 because on the one hand, Breath of the Wild, great game. Tears of the Kingdom shattered even a lot of Breath of the Wild's records. But at the same time, Tears of the Kingdom ended in such a great place. I don't know if I'd really want to see a Breath of the Wild 3. So kind of what do you think?
I agree with your final statement. I can't see Zelda. The Zelda team, especially Aonuma and Miyamoto, they really like doing new things. Me and a few others, I actually learned this from Capt Bergerson, Daniel, and then I just ended up agreeing. I was like, that makes sense. The reason you never use maps and theories between Zelda games is because the maps are designed to be so explicitly different from past games. And you can make the argument of just tectonic plates, all these different things can make things turn, whatever. But I mean, you think about the fact that the original Breath of the Wild map, Kakariko Village, and the Forbidden Forest, wow, I'm forgetting names, where the Great Deku Tree is, were flipped. And just gameplay wise, they were like, doesn't make sense, so they flip it back because story is never their first priority. But lost my train of thought. They like to make their games so very different. I mean, Skyward Sword to Breath of the Wild, that's a huge change. And part of that was because a lot of people said, hey, this was fun, but we didn't like the motion controls, or it was too linear and the sky was too boring, things like that. And so you get to Breath of the Wild, which was so vastly different. Twilight Princess came because the American audience, for some strange reason, really didn't like Wind Waker's art style. I mean, that was why my oldest brother said, I'm not doing Zelda anymore, because he said it was too cheesy. And I'm like, yeah, you should have stayed through to the end. I don't know if you know.
So great game.
Literally stabs Ganondorf in the head. It's kind of nasty, but I love Wind Waker, and I have no problem with that. So they always change it up. I mean, you just look at the 3D games. Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, yes, they use the same graphics engine in general. Then you get Wind Waker, which is super cartoony. Then you get Twilight Princess, which is super realistic. And then you get Skyward Sword, which is, I think, themed, the inspiration was watercolor or paintings in general. So that was very different. It was a lot more lighthearted, imagery-wise, than Twilight Princess, but super linear. And then you have Breath of the Wild, which is super out there. And the reason we have a Tears of the Kingdom is because there was so much stinking DLC they wanted to do that they're like, this is a whole new game. So we just got to keep going. And that's why we have it. I cannot picture them doing a third one. And mainly because the team is very bent on, we want to always have new experiences. And they did really well with the service. I know we talked about this on my channel, that they did excellent with the service. And funny enough, the two new areas, one of which they hyped up a lot, were kind of sparse a little bit, but I thought the surface was going to be terrible. I mean, maybe not terrible, but I was like, I imagine it's going to be more or less the same. I was like, wow, they really jam-packed this. They made it I almost didn't even recognize it, even though I did recognize it.
Feels much more alive.
But also the story. Yes, it was much more alive. And even though I still don't remember a ton of the side quests, I still think it was a lot better than the previous game. Nothing's going to compare to Majora's Mask side quest. I think that's just kind of inevitable. But story-wise, it had such a clear ending. And I remember thinking, how are you going to make another story out of Breath of the Wild? But that one made much more sense because Calamity Ganon was so enigmatic. Why did it start? It wasn't even just oh, this was the first time it happened. This was at least the second time. It could have been multiple times that Calamity Ganon had occurred. It could have been at least 3 times total, because maybe the first time they had no idea what to do, and then, 10,000 years later, the Sheikah finally had technology ready to handle it, and then 10,000 more years after that, we don't know. So Calamity Ganon was super enigmatic, and it was basically just, yeah, he gave up on a physical form. That's what we've surmised from that. And they managed to go with that, because I know one of the biggest questions everyone had is, why does he come out of the castle? Why does Calamity Ganon arise out of the castle? This doesn't make sense. So there was enough that was vague in Breath of the Wild that making a second story was pretty clear cut. And I think that was kind of the first that had happened, because you think about Majora's Mask, they just wanted to keep using the engine. That's what it was. And they were like, well, let's pull off of the fact that his fairy leaves. Let's pull off of that. And they just make a totally new world. And Phantom Hourglass was, well, Tetra and Link leave because the world has been flooded for years and years and years, and they're going to make a new Hyrule, so that makes sense. And then Spirit Tracks is just still years and years down the line. But like you said, the story was so clear-cut in the ending. Like, there's no... I mean, are there lore questions I have? Yes, there are lore questions I have as far as how they connect to other games, even sometimes how it connects to itself. But in terms of the big overall picture, Link and Zelda defeating Ganondorf, I don't have questions. It's like, oh, this is why he came as Calamity Ganon. Because he was trapped under there for millennia, like several dozen millennia at this point. And he finally emanated the gloom instead of malice. They went down, found him, the whole story. I just don't know what else you could do for a third one. As much as I love this world, I think if they tried to make a third one with this world or this engine, I think even I would get bored with it and be like, okay, I kind of want something new, because that's what Zelda does. I think most of us fans are used to them making something new, and this was an exception to the rule. Much like Majora's Mask is so beloved and is an exception to the rule.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Ganondorf got nuked at the end of this game. I don't see how he comes back from that. Yeah. And besides, I don't know, unless Link and Zelda journey to some other new land, and they leave this world, and they go somewhere else.
There's apparently another Zora's Domain.
Yeah, I had seen some people pointing that out. Like, apparently there's another Zora's Domain.
I totally did not catch
I didn't catch it either. And so,
what is her name?
Yona. I think it's Sidon's fiance. It's Yona, isn't it?
Yona. And her character profile says coming from a different domain, and it's like, what other Zora's Domain
For
is
real.
there?
Yes, absolutely. I was like, if they wanted, maybe that's a little seedling that they could go off of. Maybe if they wanted to do a third game, Link and Zelda journey somewhere else, and something calls to Zelda, something, I don't know, just something, you never know what they could do.
This Princess Zelda needs to retire.
I agree.
Thing. After 100 years, like, it took me a while to pick up on the fact that she was literally inside Calamity Ganon's little reincarnation sack thing. Like, poor dear. Oh my gosh, 100 years of that, and she was only 17, and then tens of thousands of years as a dragon. I mentioned this in a video. It'll be a while. It's going to be a big video, because people are like, oh, who's the dreamlike state? Does it really mean anything? I'm like, well, one thing I point out is, if you've ever had a bad dream where, like, the ones where for some reason you don't have clothes on, or just something really bad or embarrassing happens in your dream, whether you realize you're dreaming or not, there's an aspect of you going, I've got to escape, I've got to wake up. That's what I imagine it was like when she says dreamlike state. Like, she was in a very depressing, lonely dream for tens of thousands of years, and she couldn't wake up.
And
I think that's also terrible.
I have to agree with you, and there's a part of her that knew that as well, because whenever you get the last of the tears, you see her above, and she drops one more. So she knows that she's a dragon. She knows that she's not with Link, and she knows that Hyrule has suffered all of this, torment, and she can't do nothing but just float in the sky, and so I think that's represented in that final teardrop that falls, and yeah, so she's actively aware she wants to become herself again, but yeah, I'm totally with you. Yeah,
deserves retirement.
I agree. Yeah,
Don't make her do anything else.
Yeah, me and my little sister were talking about this. When she saw that memory for the first time, she straight up burst into tears. I was like, yeah, it was hard for her to watch that. But me and her got to talking, because after we both finished the game around the same time. We both got to talking, like, I've never seen a princess of Hyrule go through more crap than this particular princess of Hyrule did. She did her job. She helped Link not just straight up steal Ganondorf away. She helped Link nuke Ganondorf at the end of this game, and I totally agree. I think they deserve their happy ending, and go off into the sunset type thing. So yeah, so just to kind of wrap this up, it's been a great discussion, Geek, talking about the future of Zelda and where it could go. If this is just kind of a fun Zelda question, just kind of wrap this thing up. If Nintendo were to announce another Zelda sequel, what Zelda game would you want it to be a sequel to?
Okay, so I read this question in advance, and I spent probably far too much time thinking about it. And this is gonna sound terrible. None of them. As much as there are so many games that I absolutely love, Ocarina of Time already has a sequel, and Majora's Mask doesn't need one. If you know the Zelda timeline, it doesn't make sense for Child Link to have anything else. You can't have one post Ocarina of Time that's the adult timeline because there was no hero. That's the whole premise of Wind Waker, is it was flooded because there wasn't a hero. Downfall timeline, he dead, so that's bad. And then we get that imprisoning war, which not even gonna go there. As far as I can tell, with Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, you know, there's not those were the first two games. There's not really need for a sequel to those stories. They're pretty clear cut, very basic stuff that most games got in the 80s and 90s. Link's Awakening was a dream, so I don't see that. A Link to the Past got a spiritual successor in A Link Between Worlds, and as much as I love the wall merging mechanic, maybe if you want to explore Lorule, Phantom Hourglass is a sequel. Spirit Tracks is kind of another sequel in that sense to Phantom Hourglass. Four Swords and Four Swords Adventures are too clear. No one watched Triforce Heroes. Most don't, I should say.
I don't want it. I hated it.
I don't.
It's a horrible game. And the reason why...
The whole premise of it.
Yeah, the whole reason I hate Triforce Heroes is because I played through Four Swords Adventures. I loved Four Swords Adventures, and mainly because like the storytelling in that game, you know, there's a lot of Wind Waker Easter eggs in that game, so I really enjoyed that.
Yes.
And you have like Ganon, and you have Vati from Minish Cap. He's back, and you get to see all these great things. In Triforce Heroes, you're saving a princess from her fashion problems. Why?
It's so dumb. And actually, what stinks about that is I've used some of the music in my videos.
Music's great.
It actually has some crazy good music, I have to admit. But Minish Cap, you have Vati, who's obviously been in a couple of games. Well, 3 games now. I think it's 3. Was he in both of the Four Swords games?
He was.
Okay, I thought so. So he's already been in 3, and he doesn't have the same clout that Ganondorf does in Ganon, that I don't see him coming back in another game, but that's just me. I've only started playing Minish Cap, so I could be wrong about that. Just all of the stories are so clear-cut. Skyward Sword included. Twilight Princess, I know people really wanted a sequel. Aonuma wanted a sequel. Was it Aonuma? It was either Aonuma or Miyamoto. One of them really wanted a sequel, and they settled for Crossbow Training, which I've heard great things about it, actually.
I've played a little bit of it.
I don't know. I don't know. I went through all the Zelda games, and I was like, I don't see a need for a sequel to any of these. And I also just don't think it would happen, simply because I think for Zelda, they would feel like they're going backwards. However, not based Nintendo Zelda, like not the base Zelda creators, I could see them trying to do a sequel to Age of Calamity. Not necessarily. I don't want to get too off track, but I posed this question to some of my patrons. I was like, you know what, I just realized if you count Age of Calamity as canon, I think most don't, but if you do, and it's a split timeline, because that's the only way that can work, what happens 100 years later when Ganondorf comes back? Yeah. That raises so many more questions.
I've thought about that too.
That would be a weird game.
Yeah, I think it would be really cool too, because, you know, they all stopped Calamity Ganon in Age of Calamity. But Ganondorf is still underneath the castle.
Exactly. And my brain went 2 different directions. I was like, either we get a new hero in 100 years, and it's like Zelda's great-granddaughter or something based on the timing, and a new hero born with the spirit of a hero is born, and they just make it work, and it just happens to still be the same sages, but they don't have as tragic of a backstory because of their predecessors, or ancestors, depending on which sage. But then it's like that messes up the cyclical nature of Tears of the Kingdom, because a lot of people say like, oh, that's a split timeline in Tears of the Kingdom, and I'm like, no, it's not, because he mentions Zelda and Link by name that's the Zelda he saw in the past, Ganondorf, so it has to be that. So I was like, that messes it up. Well, then one of my patrons mentioned, he said, well, there's the other option, which is, surely they would continue exploring the Sheikah tech in Age of Calamity, but it would just be with a young Impa, Rauru, and Purah, and inevitably they would go under the castle, and, because, maybe King Rome would trust Zelda a little bit more. He might still, because I think they say in Tears of the Kingdom, if you keep prodding Zelda in the beginning, she mentioned, she was like, my father doesn't even know. He had no idea what was down here. No one knows. It's been kept such a big secret, but I have to look. My people are sick. They're falling ill, and we can't fix it. So maybe they would all go underneath the castle, and then Rauru would sense them and be like, okay, done. And it might still happen the same way, but with a less mature Zelda.
Right.
And I guess more longer hair, and it could still be cyclical, but it would just be confusing, because would the later sages still be there? Would they have gone back in time?
For real.
Because those are the sages.
Yeah.
But would it be the champions, and you'd have the champions help? It just raises so many questions of like, wait, if this is a split timeline, and it's canon, if you consider it canon, you have to wonder, Ganondorf is down there.
Yeah.
What did he do?
Yeah, I totally have to agree with you. And I'm on the side of, I think Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is a canon game, because I don't know if you played the DLC for Age of Calamity, but
I think I did a little bit.
But there's a cutscene in that game where Daruk and Yunobo are talking on top of the Divine Beast, and Daruk asks Yunobo, how did you get this strong? How did you get so courageous? And he says, I met a hero from where I'm from who taught me how to be strong and how to fight courageously. Who's he talking about? Link from the Breath of the Wild timeline that he came from, and who he went to face, Rodania with. And so I'm that one memory right there kind of tells me that I think this is a canon game. What would have really made it more explicit if it was a canon game or not is if you talked to like Sidon Yunobo in Tears of the Kingdom, and they maybe told you like they had some kind of weird experience where they went somewhere for a bit and then they came back. That would have really told us whether or not it was a real canon game. I know it's still very up in the air as to whether or not it's canon. If at most it's a great fan fiction. It's great fan fiction in a way.
For sure. Because I think most people completely discredit the original Hyrule Warriors. I know that I do. I'm like, there's too much overlap here. But Age of Calamity is like, okay, well, this is tied to a very specific game, and it's not pulling heroes from all over the Zelda franchise. It's just Breath of the Wild. So that's interesting. I'm going to have to rewatch all the cutscenes. I'm going to end up making a video about that. I know it, because I'm like, now I need to know what happens in that timeline.
Right. But yeah, and I guess one final, I kind of missed this earlier, but I guess one final question, this kind of goes back to the dungeons. Do you think like full 100% traditional Zelda dungeons are dead? I'm kind of on the fence. I think there's potential for them to come back, just because we saw them kind of seeding like small keys and shrines and stuff like that. And they didn't quite fully go there with the dungeons this time around. It was still kind of roam wherever you want, But what do you think? Do you think they're dead? Do you think they're coming back?
I'm holding out hope that they're not completely dead. I understand if what we consider traditional Zelda dungeons are definitely going to be modified. I still think, even with an open world, that there is potential for not just themed dungeons, because we got themed dungeons this time around. It was just, when I saw that you need to unlock 5 portals, whatever it is, using the Sage's ability, I was like, it's just like the 5 terminals in the Divine Beasts. So it was kind of disappointing. That was the first moment I felt disappointed in Tears of the Kingdom, but I still enjoyed it. Maybe not the Water Temple. I mostly just don't enjoy Sidon's ability. But
fighting alongside him was fun.
Alongside him, yes.
That was great.
Using his power, useless.
Yeah, not that
like,
great.
I don't need a burst of water, and it stinks because he's such a good character. I like him a lot, but no. The other ones were really fun to use, but except Minoru's, I was like, cool, you're really slow, can't do it. But anyway, I don't want to think they're dead. There have been previous Zelda games where you could do dungeons in relatively any order. I think, but I don't know much about Link to the Past, but I'm assuming A Link to the Past because A Link Between Worlds is the spiritual successor, and that's how it is in this game, you can basically do them in any order. There's a recommended order. I mean, even in Ocarina of Time, you can, I didn't know this till just a couple of years ago, a lot of people go to the Spirit Temple before the Shadow Temple, and that always threw me off. I was like, why wouldn't you do the Shadow Temple first? But now I understand why. Some people do the Spirit Temple first, and some of it has to do with the order of the medallions. People do it in that order, and I can understand that. Story-wise, I always prefer the Shadow Temple first, maybe because that's what I was always known, but there was potential to do things in a different order there. Wind Waker could have had the potential to do it, a couple of dungeons in different order. I've seen a lot of talk about that. I don't know much about the other games, but I think they've got to bring them back. I know it can't be exactly the same. Some elements have to be different, but there's got to be a way to keep the small keys, the big boss keys, have a mid-boss, and still have it feel open, still have the item that you use. And I will say, you do get the whole dungeon item feel in Tears of the Kingdom because of the Sage. You have to use Tulin's wind ability in order to activate those portals. You have to use each Sage's ability in order to progress through the temples, dungeons. So that at least was like, okay, that's a little bit of it coming back. Whereas in Breath of the Wild, you don't get the ability till the end. And it's very different abilities too. So yeah, I hope it's not dead. We'll just have to wait and see what they decide to do with it. Because I think their issue is going to be they have to weigh what do traditional fans want. Not even necessarily traditional, but just longtime fans. Because there are some people that hated Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom for some reason because of them being open world. I was hesitant too, and then I was like, I don't want to go back. I want to keep it open. Yeah. And I love Ocarina of Time. I adore that game, but even I go back to it, and it's like, oh man, I kind of wish I could just go wherever I wanted, but it's, so pigeonholed. They're having to weigh what do our longtime fans want. This is what we've always done. With always giving a different flair each time versus what does the overall gaming world want, because I don't think anyone can deny Breath of the Wild brought in a ton of fans. For anyone that knows Drake and Wild, we had her on the discussion. She mentioned that was her first Zelda game, was Breath of the Wild, and now she's starting to explore a bunch of other games, and I know a lot of people said it either was their first Zelda game or it got them back in the franchise. So they're having to weigh what they've always done versus, okay, well, this is what was successful, because they do have to make money. So I hope it's not dead, but we'll see.
Yeah, and it seems like they're trying to get back to that point, because even though we didn't get full traditional dungeons again, we did get colossal-sized temples again, and that was such a huge breath of fresh air for me, because I was like, oh wow, Fire Temple. That's awesome. And I'm like, I hope the rest of the dungeons are like this. Oh, Wind Temple. This is great. Okay, temples are back. Yes, this is awesome. And then to top it off, like colossal sized bosses were brought back. When I went and I saw that Goma was back, like I was such a fan of Ocarina of Time, to see Goma back in a huge, big, colossal-sized form in this new world of Zelda, I was losing my mind. And the same, like, another favorite boss of mine was Colgera from the Wind Temple. Love that boss, and mainly because that's such a love letter to Wind Waker. Just the music and just the actual boss's name itself, Colgera, Mulgera from the Wind Temple in Wind Waker. So it is, I feel like they're trying to get back there, but it's just going to take a slow process of trying to figure out how to integrate that. But I think what they've done in Tears of the Kingdom was such a massive upgrade from Breath of the Wild, and I think slowly but surely I think we'll get back to traditional Zelda dungeons. So are they dead? I think it's up for debate. I hope they're not. I'm a lot like you. I hope they're not. But yeah, this has been such an awesome discussion, getting to talk about just the future of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, some of the best things we've enjoyed about it, and some things that might carry over. And thanks for joining me today. Where can people find you?
Well, thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it. I love stuff like this, and I've been trying to reach out to more people and join more discussions, especially when I go through a lull of I don't really have any script ideas. So it's like, well, let's just talk about Zelda, because that's easy for me to do. You can find me on YouTube, Geek Apprentice. I do also have an Instagram, same handle. and Twitter, TGA_geekdom. I just kind of really only use those for promotional purposes. I used to do Q&As on Instagram, but I recently got rid of the app from my phone. It's just not a good place for me. So I was like, I need to not be there. And Twitter is definitely not something good for the way I am personality-wise. So it's purely just promotional purposes. You can go there though, but I'm mainly just YouTube. youtube.com/Geek Apprentice. I have live streams. Once I settle into my new teaching schedule, it'll most likely be Monday and Friday mornings, probably around like 10 or 11 Eastern Standard Time, which I know is super early for my Pacific Coast friends, but at least everyone overseas will be able to see it, because sometimes I would stream at night and they're like, it's 4 a.m. I'm like, oh, sorry. So that's where I am.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, Geek's socials and all the links to her channel will be in the description below. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Geek, thanks again for coming on. And until the next video, everyone, thanks for watching and take care.